Hi, I'm Taylor T. Carlson, and we're going to do another classic video game review today. Breaking out the NES Classic Edition again today, and we're going to take a look at Metroid, which is the first game in the series of the same name. This game was released for the Famicom Disk System in Japan in 1986, with an American version for the NES following up the next year. This, of course, is the first game in the franchise, and unlike later games that used a battery for saving, this one uses passwords to save progress. The Japanese version actually used a save system, but unfortunately that didn't get ported over to America. You play in this game as Samus, who is a bounty hunter who is hired by the Galactic Police Force to go to the planet Zebus to deal with the Metroids, which are a strange predator life form that is being utilized by space pirates who, of course, want to divide and conquer and use them for their own agenda. Samus has to go through the planet's mazes and corridors, collecting several new weapons and items, fighting her way through, working her way through and fighting boss enemies along the way, eventually arriving at the base of Torian, which is the home of the Mother Brain, who is the central intelligence used by the space pirates, putting an end to their scheme. The actual story of this game is somewhat debatable, since a lot of it just comes out of player's guides, and obviously the in-text game is very limited, and needless to say, the translations weren't exactly the best back then. The game is somewhat open-ended, however, you do need to get certain weapons and items in order to advance through the game. You start the game with just a puny little cannon and only 30 units of energy, but as you go through the game, you can get things like a morphing ball ability, which will let you squeeze between tight corridors, a long beam, which will let you fire across the whole screen, the Varia, which will actually make it so that you take less damage, and then there's things like high jump boots, missiles that you can use against stronger enemies and to open certain doors, the screw attack, which will weaponize your spin jump, and then there's also a few different beam power-ups as well. You can even get energy tanks along the way, which will maximize how much life you can carry, and these definitely come in handy later in the game when you're taking more damage from tougher enemies. The game is divided into a few different areas. There's Brinstar, where you start the game, Norfair, which is like the fiery area, Kraid's Lair, which of course is where Kraid, one of the boss enemies, lives, Ridley's Lair, which is where the other boss enemy lives, and then Torian, which is the home base area where the Metroids and the Mother Brain reside. If you get killed and get a game over, you're given a password, and from then you can restart the game from the beginning of the area in which you died. At the time, one of the things that was pretty innovative about this game is that when you finally complete the game, you see that Samus, the hero character, is actually a female. These days, it's common knowledge, but it was a pretty big plot twist back then. The ending of the game differs slightly depending on how quickly you complete the game, and the one difference here is what outfit Samus will be wearing. Like, if you take over 10 hours, she's just going to have her full suit of armor on. If you beat it a little faster, she'll have the full suit of armor, but she'll take off her helmet so you can see that she's female, and then, like, you beat it faster, she won't have her armor on at all. She'll just have her leotard under the suit. And if you beat the game in the absolute fastest capacity, she'll only be wearing a bikini. And that, of course, is really only possible by doing the New Game Plus that you can do, retaining some of your weapons and items after you complete the game. There's also something you can use on the second controller where if you enter a certain input, it's sort of a suicide code, which will kill you, give you the password, and take you back to the beginning of the area. And that's actually pretty useful for people who like to do things like speed runs, or if you don't want to fight your way all the way back to the beginning of a certain area to go back to the previous area. It's also worth noting that the game's password system actually has a few passwords that maybe weren't intentionally programmed into the game, but they have some interesting effects and potential glitches. I'm not going to list any of those passwords here, but if you go searching on YouTube or Google or GameFAQs or any of those other sites, you can find all kinds of passwords to try out, and there's definitely some interesting stuff to be had there. All these years later, it's been 35 or so years since this game came out. How does the first Metroid game measure up? Overall, I would say that the game does stand the test of time, although being the first entry in the series, there are a few problems that are pretty noticeable right from the get-go. First of all, the controls are not nearly as refined as they are in later games, and this can definitely result in some problems, particularly in the precision platform jumping and when you're dealing with certain enemies. One of the biggest problems the game has is that there is no map. And considering the game is absolutely huge and there's so many different areas, and it doesn't help that a lot of them kind of look alike, it's really hard to know where you're going. And even a lot of the hidden areas that you need to bomb or shoot to find, there's nothing that really defines them or tells you where they are. So again, like a lot of games from this area, it's just kind of trial and error. Another big issue worth mentioning is that you can only have one beam weapon at a time. You get the long beam early in the game, and then there's two specialized elemental beams, an ice beam and a wave beam. The ice beam lets you freeze enemies in place, but it's really no more powerful than your regular weapon. The wave beam, on the other hand, is much more powerful and actually lets you fire through walls. The problem here is, even though the wave beam sounds like the better option for the long term, if you go to Torian at the end of the game and you have the wave beam, you cannot harm the Metroids, because the only way you can do that is with the ice beam. There's two ice beams hidden in the game, and there's one wave beam, and if you get one or the other, the beam that you have will go back to its previous location, so you can go back and get the other one if you need to mix it up. But honestly, I found this to be more of a pain than it should have been. The game should have let you have both beams at the same time, even if you need to switch between them. Later games introduced an inventory subscreen where you could switch, which was kind of nice. And on top of that, some of those later games, including Super Metroid, my personal favorite in the series, actually let you combine beam weapons so you could create something new. It's also kind of a pain having to enter passwords every time you want to play the game, considering you've got to enter 24 characters, and the game has the full alphabet as well as a full set of numbers as well. It's also a bit of a pain in that there are no life recharge stations. If you get an energy tank, it'll fill your life up all the way, but when you start the game after a game over or entering your password, you start out with a mere 30 units of life, and you pretty much have to kill enemies to save up energy in order to get the life you need to go and do what you need to do. And when you get way more energy tanks and way more life capacity, that can take a very long time, as you'll quickly discover. The first Metroid certainly lacks the polish of later entries in the series, but given that this came out way back in 1986 in Japan and 1987 in America, it's actually held up pretty well, and I do find myself going back to this one despite the issues. What do you think of the original Metroid? Is it a personal favorite? Are you not a fan? Share in the comments section below what you think about this game. Also remember to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'm Taylor T. Carlson, and I will see you for my next video game review.